Thank you so much for joining us here for the second of our Irish Unity webinar series focused on learning how to get everyone a better understanding of this historic moment we are in and a clearer sense of the role we can all play. There are many factors and perspectives in the current Irish Unity conversation. That's not even to mention the decades and centuries of history. It can feel overwhelming and challenging to try to catch up or to learn more about any one aspect of it all. And we're not going to be able to get everyone caught up on every angle and every piece on the same page. But it is our hope that by setting aside time once a month, we'll be able to deepen our understanding of the key elements of this conversation and to use that knowledge to inspire action. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Greg O'Loughlin. I serve as the Executive Director of Friends of Sinn Féin. I'm responsible for the newsletter and social media, events and activism, education. I began working with Friends of Sinn Féin in 1997 when I worked in Washington, D.C. with Rita O'Hare. After some time working in classrooms and teaching English in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm now back at this work full time. I'm very grateful and happy to be welcoming our guest today, Professor Colin Harvey, Professor of Human Rights Law in the Queen's University Belfast School of Law, a Fellow at the Senator George Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice, an Associate Fellow of the Institute of Irish Studies, and a Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. He's a Commissioner on the Human Rights and Equality Commission, and a member of the Scientific Committee of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, and much, much more. That's just the beginning part of his biography. And we are so grateful that he has taken time out of his busy schedule to spend some time with us today to dig into some of the questions of Irish unity. Welcome, Professor Colin Harvey. We're so happy you're here.
Good, Greg. Thank you very much, and really delighted to be here and for the invitation to join you this afternoon.
Thank you. Would you take a moment? I shared just a little bit of your biography. Could you share with us a little bit more about perhaps your day-to-day work and why when we said, hey, could you join us for a call? You said, yeah, I want to do that. What's your day-to-day look like? And thanks for joining us.
Well, Greg, I suppose the most important thing to mention is that I'm from Derry.
Yeah.
And I was born in 1970, so I lived through the conflict, and I've seen us get to where we've got to. I'm a professor in the School of Law, Queen's University, Belfast.
Yeah.
A former head of the law school, former director of the Human Rights Centre. I'm now serve on the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, having previously served on the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. And in that role, I was involved in major constitutional process there, trying to get a Bill of Rights for the North that many of the audience today will have heard about, and just making sure promises are delivered. In terms of the current discussion and what we're talking about today, I'm a board member of Ireland's Future, really the lead civic organisation campaigning for Irish reunification, but I've also been involved in other civic initiatives, such as with the Constitutional Conversations Group. So, Greg, in addition to my academic work, which people can read on the Queen's website and all of that, is very open and accessible, and all. I suppose I've played a public role in advancing the constitutional conversation here, post-Brexit in particular. I'm a good friend to the US. I'm a regular visitor to the US. I've spent wonderful time in Fordham Law School. I have very, very strong connections to Fordham in New York as a visiting professor, spoken at a wide range of events, and most recently I was in New York to speak at a number of events in November 2024. Forged very strong connections across decades. I suppose by way of introduction, just to put it out there, to my mind, with my academic hat on and my campaigning hat on, the evidence seems clear that we're on a pathway to the choice envisaged in the Good Friday Agreement. In other words, we're on a pathway to achieving a new and united Ireland. And my view is that's where we are now at. We talked prior to this discussion about, we used the phrase game on, right? So that's how I'd frame our discussion.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It sounds to me a little bit as though your activism and awareness of the goal of unity perhaps predated your entry into academia. Is that about right? And so
absolutely. I've always been a United Irelander, if you want to use that terminology. And part of that was really growing up in Derry and
Yes.
seeing just how damaging uh, partitionism was, how damaging separation and division is for the North. Look, in Derry, as people will know, the border makes absolutely no sense at all, and it's had awful consequences for Derry and the whole Northwest region in general. So I've always been a United Irelander, but a really important moment in recent history has been Brexit. You know,
Yeah.
we were taken out of the European Union against our wishes,
Yep.
and that was really the starting point for a lot of organic conversations, which
Yeah.
ultimately led to the formation of Ireland's future,
That's
a
right.
growing civic movement. We actually started off talking about issues of citizenship,
Mm.
rights, and equality, and we're deeply worried about the impact of Brexit for people in the North. And that evolved into a more focused conversation around reunification and
I see.
constitutional change as a
Yeah.
way forward. And I suppose for people tonight, today, you know, I don't have to, Ireland's future is well known. We've
Yeah.
had events across the island of Ireland, events internationally. We've published policy papers. We've
It,
done,
yeah.
we've filled major halls. We've done all that. We can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I was
so
gonna say. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I just think in recent times,
Yeah.
events here have led a lot of people to focus on the chance for change in Ireland, North and South, to create and build a fairer and better society. And
Yeah.
as I said earlier, we are now on a pathway towards that choice, in my view.
Yeah, it does seem that way. And I think maybe I would hope that a lot of folks on the call are familiar with the work of Islands Future, but perhaps you can speak a little bit more. I wasn't aware of the roots of the organization in that way, kind of looking at some key questions and expanding. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work of Islands Future? And I know that they have hosted some wonderful events in the United States as well as primarily all across Ireland.
Yeah. So a starting point for those listening and watching will be to have a look at our Ireland's Future website, where a
Yeah.
lot of our material is. But to sum up, we're really a civil society organization, a
Yes.
non-governmental organization
And
that
non-political
tries
party affiliated as
yeah,
well.
we're
Yeah,
not
yeah,
aligned to any political party. We work with all
yeah.
political parties
Yeah.
who are committed to Irish reunification or who are thinking about
Curious about
Irish
it.
reunification. And
Yeah.
I suppose our sense is that we can f fulfill an important space in
Yeah.
those conversations by being a hub, by bringing people together, facilitating conversations. So we do what civic society organizations in the US all over the world do. We
Yeah.
produce policy papers, we have seminars, we've had major events, you know, the Waterfront Hall in Belfast,
Yeah.
the Three Arena in Dublin,
Yes.
last year, the SSE Arena,
Mhm.
and we've done a podcast with Leo Varadkar,
Yeah.
and we've done a number of online events as well. And what's been really striking for us is the appetite for this
Yes.
conversation among political parties and civil society is absolutely huge.
Yeah. And we were just speaking about that before the call as well. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing information about the Islands Future is doing excellent work on both sides, and I do highly recommend spending time on their website. Their papers they have published and the research they're doing is so vital to this question and making sure we have answers to these things. Have you noticed a shift in academia? So you spend a lot of time in colleges and universities where we're noticing and are describing an appetite on the ground amongst activists and folks just going to work every day and saying we need to figure this out. Sometimes it's slow to have those ripples impact what is deemed to be acceptable research or reasonable research, or the notion that there could be a field of academia focusing on this question. Have you seen a shift in that area?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Been huge. What is so commendable about the work that is ongoing on achieving United Ireland is how much the focus is on sensible preparation and planning and responsible management. And
Ah,
part of responsible management of this process is ensuring that what you say is based on evidence
yeah.
and credible evidence, and that you can stand over the arguments. Many people watching will know uh, what happened around Brexit, right? And people on the island of Ireland don't want to repeat that. So
Yes.
university research is very, very important in building an evidential base, whether that's individual academics or research projects. I could cite many examples here this evening, but the work that's been done by the Economic Social Research Institute, the ESRI in
Yeah.
Dublin, the Shared Island Research Initiative, funded out of the Shared Island Unit, Department of the Taoiseach, something called the Orange Project, which is a
Yeah.
cooperative project between the Royal Irish Academy and Notre Dame University in the US, is
Yeah.
producing articles, a lot of excellent research material, but probably the one that may be of interest at the moment is the polling and survey deliberative forum work that's being
Yeah.
done in collaboration with the Irish Times, which
Yeah.
is published and available on the Irish Times website. And I'm going to continue because I want to give you a sense of this. So the civic
Please. Yeah.
initiatives, the
Yeah.
Ireland's Future work that I've talked about already, work
Yeah.
by groups like the Constitutional Conversations Group, Shared Ireland podcast. There's recently been an all-island women's assembly that's produced an excellent report. So there are seminars, conferences, podcasts, books. That there's almost feels like there's a book a month coming out
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
moment on
That's right.
United Ireland. Just want to mention a few other initiatives that are producing very, very helpful information. Sinn Féin has the Commission on the Future of Ireland, which
That's
is
right.
doing fantastic work, excellent work in assisting and making sure this is an inclusive, participative discussion. The SDLP have set up a New Ireland Commission that's doing useful work too. And for me, really notable last year was the Oireachtas Committee on the Good Friday Agreement
Yeah.
produced two excellent research reports on planning for the future and constitutional change. And what was notable about that Oireachtas committee, you think about all the political parties sitting together, is that they recommended immediate preparation by the Irish government, and
Yes.
that was a really important moment for
What?
this
Yeah.
discussion. So I've created a big list there, and I've talked through a number of examples, and happy to follow up with people after today.
Yeah.
But what I want to do for the audience with us today is to give people a sense of the scale of preparatory work that is
Yeah.
already underway and
Great.
thinking about the hard questions to reinforce that sense that we are genuinely on a pathway to a border poll in Ireland.
Yeah. That's a great note to hit. That is it's thank you for all those resources. I was trying to write down many of them. I'll try to compile a list to share with our viewers afterwards,
And
and certainly
I will
to
follow up
I-
after as well with you
yeah.
too,
I
Daniel.
appreciate that, but it is, but like you say, it is in its collection, in addition to the individual list, which is impressive. The totality of that does demonstrate, shine a light directly on from every corner, from civic societies to political parties to governmental committees to from every channel to
Yeah,
professors and research and universities. The work is pointing towards the need to prepare for
yeah,
referendums, to the need
yeah,
to get ready for that kind of work. Do you see, and yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, just to agree with what you're saying, it
Yeah.
underlines the seriousness with which people are taking this in a post-conflict society. They've
Yes.
seen essentially Britain make a mess of a,
Yes.
of a referendum recently, the consequences of that, and there's no desire in Ireland to see a repetition of that here.
And it doesn't have to be that way. That wasn't the
Absolutely.
result of
Yeah.
something that was needed. It was just poorly handled, and it can be handled in a much more careful manner. I'm not going to ask you to predict or to commit to anything, but we look between where we sit now and to when we can hopefully enter a voting booth and make our desire known. What do you see as some key, and from your perspective, some key obstacles that kind of are in the way between here and there? If we can say certainly an informed voting population, it would be one that we're working on. That. What are some other things, or what do you see on the path?
Yeah, it, it's a great question, and it's important to just take a step back and frame what we're talking about
Great.
today when we think about a united Ireland. So before we get to the obstacles, we'll think
Yes.
about the pathway
Okay.
to getting there. And the
Thank you.
starting point for, our work in Ireland's future and for much of the work in this area is the Good Friday Agreement framework,
Sure. Yeah.
our peace agreement. And essential to keep in mind that that's just not just a political document, but international law as well. So there's an
Yes.
international legal framework for what we're talking about. Also, in relation to the Irish Constitution, Article 3, the Northern Ireland Act 1998 in a UK context, all to underline that there's a legal underpinning as well for what we're talking about, as well as the politics of all of that. But let's sum that up in this way, or I'll sum
Sure.
it up in this way.
Mhm.
The people of the island of Ireland have a right to decide, and the people of the North have a right to have a choice around their own future. Now, we can use the language of a border poll, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
People have been made a promise that they have a choice. And what we're heading towards here is that people will get to exercise that choice. And that
Right.
should hardly be surprising 27 years after the Good Friday Agreement.
Right.
Just in terms of
Yeah.
some of the, Greg, the steps along the way. At the moment, there's a lot of focus on preparation and getting ready. And people rightly ask, well, what do I mean when I say preparation? Calls, for example, for an all Ireland civic initiative. People have talked about an all Ireland citizens assembly. So you
Yes.
engage people in the work, a dedicated Oireachtas committee in the
Yeah.
Oireachtas to think specifically on this issue. Also, government responsibility. Why not have a minister and a ministry charged with specific responsibility on constitutional change to
Yeah.
help with the preparatory work? A green paper, for example, from the government to encourage the government to step into that space. In other words, that people need to be working on a plan, what the
Yeah.
prospectus, what the document that we're all going to be campaigning on looks like. Then, when we think about steps, uh, we need to think about intergovernmental steps as well,
Yes.
because there'll be an Irish-British negotiation and dialogue where the parameters will be sketched out and agreements will be reached. There'll be a joint framework document, if you like, around all this
Yes.
to make sure that there's absolute certainty and clarity around the Good Friday Agreement framework, that people are respecting all those principles, like, for example, rigorous responsibility in terms of British government. And my view is, there's a bit of a debate about this in the literature, but that my view and my hope would be that the referendums that happen on the island of Ireland, North and South, will happen on the same day, North and
Yeah.
South.
Yeah.
So, in an ideal world for me, that people across the island of Ireland will go into a voting booth and vote on the same day. So just three elements to that preparation now, including
Yep.
the nature of the offer, negotiation dialogue on a time frame. I'm a big believer in timeframes, Greg. I think
Yeah.
sometimes there's a risk of procrastination if you don't have a time frame, and then
Yeah.
making the choice itself a border poll.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm taking a long road round to answering your
No.
question about obstacle.
But we can get there
Yeah,
later. Yeah. So,
no, no, and I'm gonna put out some ideas now. I
yeah.
think for me, right, speaking very, very personally, an obstacle at the moment is governmental unwillingness to face directly into the challenge.
Yeah.
And let's be candid about this today. Um, if an Irish government isn't raising this as a priority issue, what hope is there that a British government would ever take this step?
Yes.
So there's a real difficulty around governmental unwillingness, including Irish government unwillingness to face directly into the challenge of preparation, which I think to an increasing number of people on the island is slightly bewildering. Why? Because we all know that that's what governments do.
Yeah.
Governments do planning and preparation and
Yeah.
management, strategic foresight, all this stuff.
Yes.
Then another obstacle will be triggering a referendum in the north. How we actually get a referendum in the
Yeah.
north, and that's where I think allies and friends and others all around the world will be helpful in focusing the mind of the British government. And then a final point and an obstacle seems like it's an obvious point to raise, but then uh, we have to um, get the numbers to win a
Yes.
referendum.
Yeah.
And so that is a challenge.
Yes, thank you. That is quite a detailed path from
Yeah.
here to there. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, we just had a question or a comment there in the chat, and it's an issue amongst the planning and the obstacles that come up often. And it's a little pedantic, it's a little nerdy, I guess, to say that as it is in the Good Friday Agreement, there is the responsibility to call the referendum that lies with the Secretary of State of the North, right? That and it says that he shall call it, he or she shall call it
Yeah.
when such it looks as though there is um, the majority of people who are in favor of unity. But that's different than he or she may call it at any time. It could be called, it would be a bad idea to call it today, but you could call it today legally amongst the language of the, is that correct? Is that a correct reading? And what is that? You say it might require the work of the international community to focus the mind of the British government to say, hey, listen, this is an important time in that. Can you talk about that? That does seem to be a common question when we're at events around the country, when people are emailing, that moment of the decision to call, and then perhaps secondarily, the role of Irish government, either legally or politically, plays in really bringing that attention to that question.
Well, I suppose, Greg, it's why the Good Friday Agreement is so important. There
Yeah,
are, there is a framework set out there. I suppose two things to keep in mind. There's a duty on the Secretary of State to trigger a border poll
yeah,
where it appears likely that a majority would vote for a united Ireland. And then
yes,
there's a wider discretion to do so at any time.
yeah,
So there's a duty there when it appears likely that a majority would vote for change. But obviously, one of the challenging elements of all of that has been the question of when does it appear likely?
and yeah,
So
by
there,
what means or what
yeah.
metric would you use? Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's all sorts of ongoing debate around that. What do you use? Opinion poll evidence, electoral
Yeah,
evidence, and what happens? What do we do when there's contested sources of evidence there? But
yeah,
obviously, the Good Friday Agreement is quite clear. When it appears likely a majority would vote for change, then there's an obligation on the British government to take that step.
yes.
My view is that we know enough now in order to begin the preparatory work. And as I've said already, a lot of that preparatory work is already ongoing.
Underway, exactly right,
Yeah,
which is great
yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
And is there evidence that that proprietary work, that research is moving the needle within the Irish government? Because it does seem as though, like you say, if the Irish government isn't banging this drum and singing this note and making this a priority, then the British government is certainly not going to say like, well, we'll drive, thank you, we'll take it from here. Is the research, is the civic action, is the activism beginning to focus the minds of folks in the Irish government, or where do we see? Is there a disconnect? Is there a channel? What's happening there?
Well, I think one thing is that obviously the Irish government has established the Shared Island Initiative,
Okay,
which is although studiously avoided dealing with the question of constitutional change.
that's okay.
I think it is an important initiative. It's doing useful work. But obviously, there is a desperate need for leadership from the Irish government on this issue. Absolutely right. But also keep in mind that the work is shifting the dial in terms of opinion polling,
Yes,
because what's clear across a range of opinion polls is that whether it's a Northern Ireland Life and Times survey or the work that Orange is doing with the Irish Times, is that the gap is closing and support for Irish unity is rising. So
yeah,
the dial is moving in that sense, yes.
it's good to see that, and it's I think that line is so I don't know, maybe lives in the negative space of the Good Friday Agreement, right? We can see in positive terms, we can see the language that says the Secretary of State must call at such time, and in the negative space is that's going to happen when the Irish government pushes that as a key priority. They're not going to find themselves one day waking up saying, hey, let's have a poll. Right? It's
Yeah,
going to
no, and
happen.
one of the things I've argued recently in the Irish news is that we need to begin to reframe this discussion
Yes.
as much more around a intergovernmental, political, and civic negotiation that's based on a time frame, based on agreements, and we move away from the idea that the Secretary of State wakes up one day and decides to trigger a border poll. That
Yeah.
just isn't the way it's going to work, and it's not the way it
It
should
shouldn't.
work either. But to reiterate the point from earlier, if the Irish government is not pressing on this, why would any British government uh, do so? So I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of the focus needs to be now. But having put the conversation mainstream in the center of Irish public life and actually internationally as well, we're now entering a new phase of that conversation where we really are beginning to think about, for example, negotiating a time frame.
Yeah.
You know, what does hard preparatory work actually look like?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'm seeing in the comments there, so some Martin Burns is saying it's time for Irish America to lobby directly the Irish government, perhaps communicate with them, if not lobby. And it kind of brings me to the question you mentioned, not, the need for an international kind of presence, folks from all over the world weighing in on the value and the reasons why this is an important step and why it's important to have their minds focused on this. If not exclusively Irish America, I mean, and please include Irish America. What do you think of the role of the work that we're doing? I host people's assemblies for the Commission on the Future of Ireland across the United States. There's one happening today in Vancouver, in Canada. They're really growing in engagement and conversation. What do you have thoughts on that work, or maybe a message to Irish Americans showing up at these events, or kind of what kind of conversation would you like to have there?
Well, we started earlier talking about Ireland's future and
Yes.
Ireland's future being a civil society organization. And one of the most commendable aspects of this whole discussion around United Ireland has been the emphasis on civic participation and engagement
Yeah.
everywhere. Because what we're all involved in doing together across borders, all around the world, in the US and everywhere, is building a broad, wide, and deep civic and political coalition for change in Ireland. Because we're really talking about global Ireland as well
Yeah.
when we use that term. So, your work, the work that you're doing, is essential because this needs to be a wide and deep civic
Yes.
participatory conversation in
Yes.
order to ensure people are included, that all voices are heard. Because what are we doing? We're trying to shape a new and united Ireland.
Right.
What a remarkable thing to be involved in, and we want to get that right. In order to get it right, we need to hear from people
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, that's we have attending these events, Irish America, perhaps third and fourth generation, and Irish nationals who have moved over to the States just months ago in some cases. And this is a key channel for that conversation. And to be in the
Yeah,
room where those priorities are listed and those questions are asked and those conversations are happening, it's pretty exciting. It's a pretty invigorating space to be in and to hear
yeah,
the priorities there. And it
yeah,
ranges from fulfilling the wishes of my grandfather to I think I'm going to figure out how to work the licensing. If I'm a teacher, if I have a teaching license in the north, will that
yeah,
apply in the south? Like all the really granular questions that are
yeah,
essential to making a confident voter base,
yeah. And I think, look, Craig, one of the things now as we move into this next phase is that people are talking and working on much more detail because
Yeah.
what we're ultimately working on is prospectus, a document that
Yeah.
we've used the language in our work, Ireland's Future. We published a document last year, Ireland 2030. We talked about
Yes.
a program for New Ireland.
Yeah.
So we'll be, once the Irish government is fully on board, we'll be presenting a document that spells out in granular detail what this all means, because you won't want a referendum anywhere without having the answers to those sorts of questions too. But what's crystal clear from the evidence already is that people will be better off on this island in a new and united Ireland, and all the evidence is underlining that point on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
That's right. That's right. We had our guest last month, Glenn Bradley, who brought a fascinating personal story, and it highlighted some of the key questions and the responsibility to make sure that everyone on the island of Ireland feels confident about what will happen at the result of a border poll. Many unionists are saying, "Listen, I'm probably not going to vote for unity, but I will happily live with the outcome of the vote. It'll be what it'll be if that's the will of the people." Do you have thoughts on outreach and bringing in the perspectives and experiences from folks for whom unity might not be their first choice, or how do we communicate cross culturally to get folks feeling as though this is an appropriate and safe conversation?
Yeah. Um, it, the emphasis on dialogue
Yeah.
means talking to people who don't necessarily believe in a united Ireland as a first
Yeah.
option, because we want people to feel safe, secure, and comfortable and whatever comes next. But what's really noticeable to my mind is that in many of the rooms I'm in at the moment, whether that's public events or private events, there are people from a small unionist Protestant background who want to hear more. They're
Yes.
interested in the future. They're, to be candid, in many occasions, just disheartened by what they've seen happening in Britain and in England and in the Brexit environment, and they want something different and better. They've also seen in many ways how successful the South has been,
Yes.
across a range of areas in terms of basic socioeconomic issues. So they want to hear more. And they're interested in a better future for the children and grandchildren. And that's a sort of language increasingly
Yeah.
people, if you listen to, for example, what Davy Adams
Yeah.
has been saying recently around all of that, that's what we're hearing more and more of.
Yeah, it is encouraging, and the space to have these conversations and the
Yeah,
multiple channels upon which you can have these conversations, from civic to governmental to political. It is vital that people feel as though it's an important conversation for them to be a part of. I'm going to see here. There's a question, and I see Charlie Curry asking, and I think it's right to the heart of some of the confusion about the Secretary of State's role, the political role, the legal role. It says the Secretary of State has a duty to call a poll, but does he have a legally enforceable duty to do so? And I think that's the intersection of legal and political. Is that right?
yeah. One of the things that there's been litigation around of this,
Yeah.
a court judgment from the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal. And I suppose that is one of the issues that's concerning some people is the amount of flexibility, political flexibility that
Yes.
judgment gives the Secretary of State. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons why I emphasize the need to build a coalition as well around all of that.
Yes.
That, we get to the moment where there's a duty on the Secretary of State to take that step. We're not at that point yet. That's my own view in terms of looking at some of the polling evidence. But when we get there, what do we do, both legally and politically, in order to force that issue over the line? And I think that will take more than law, and it'll also
Yeah.
involve politics as well and civic pressure.
It does seem to be that intersection of all of those, a well-educated populace speaking to this issue and
Yeah,
raising their concerns at the
yeah,
same time applying political pressure. And it's probably similar political pressure in the Republic, where you have a government structure that isn't necessarily incentivized
yeah,
for major change like this, right? A
yeah.
major change like this is going to lead to outcomes that are unpredictable, say, and that's not always what governments want. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think, look, I'm just looking at my computer here is telling me that Queens may will be doing an update at about 5:36 on my computer, so I may
Okay.
disappear at some point. So,
Okay. If we
so if
lose you.
if 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 I do get cut off here by Queens in terms of this system, I just wanted to say, look, you're absolutely right, and look, I've really, really appreciated the opportunity to speak to everyone today. You're doing absolutely essential work, but you're right about the South. We ask what people can do. People can put pressure on the Irish government to
Yeah.
step up.
Yeah.
There's now a strong onus on Micheál Martin and Simon Harris to join the rest of us
That's right.
in the preparatory work about a united Ireland. So people of influence in this call today, to use your voice, to use the pressure that you have, the civic and political voices that you have to begin to ask the Irish government, where is the Irish government in the
Yeah.
planning and preparation for constitutional change in the island of Ireland? Because at the moment it looks as if it's missing.
It does. It appears as though I see Martin Burns's comment. It looks like the people are well out ahead of the government on this question,
Yeah,
and it's time for them to catch up and
absolutely.
to make sure that that's. I will respect and understand the worry of the laptop. I was going to ask again, and you shared
Yeah,
so many earlier resources. Is
yeah.
there a book? Is there a video? Is there a speaker in particular that you recommend folks here in addition to some of the things you have shared? I know that Aaron's project does a great podcast. Where can folks continue to learn and find some of your writing and research as well?
Well, all my work is available online on the Queen's University Belfast
Excellent.
website. So look at that. Ireland's future work on our website in terms of our policy papers. The various events that we've done are also online. The Ireland's project, again, is available online, produces open.
Well, it would appear as though his computer was reset, and I will make a list of these events, of these resources he was sharing. That is unfortunate, but I am so grateful for the time that Professor Harvey was able to spend with us and share the latest and the legal and constitutional perspective of the work happening. Thank you all again for joining us. We will be back on the air with October guest. I'll have information and a link and a name to share with everybody very soon. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and we hope to see you again. And there's plenty of work to do. So at the end of this here, perhaps find ways to get in touch with the consulate, the Irish consulate in the area, the honorary consulate, perhaps your local representative at the state or city level. And then if we are in your city with the People's Assembly in the next couple of months, we would love to see you in Boston, in Philadelphia, or in Hartford, and then more dates to be announced soon after that. Again, thank you so much for taking the time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.